Picture this. It's 63 BC. The legendary Roman general Pompey the Great is standing right at the gates of Jerusalem, and he's looking at a city that seems, well, completely unconquerable, a real fortress. But here's the twist. Its fate wasn't going to be decided by Roman swords, but by a bitter conflict that was already tearing the city apart from the inside.
And that really brings us to the core question, right? How does a fortress like that, a place that seems totally impenetrable from the outside, actually fall? Well, lucky for us, the historian Flavius Josephus left behind this incredible and honestly pretty tragic account of how a city that was fortified against the whole world ended up becoming its own worst enemy. Let's dig into exactly how that went down.
All right, so let's try to see this through Pompey's eyes. Put ourselves in his sandals. He's standing there, looking at Jerusalem, and he's not just seeing another city to conquer. No, this was a military nightmare. This was the kind of challenge that could push even his famous battle-hardened legions to their absolute breaking point.
You see, the genius of Jerusalem's defense was that it was built in layers. First off, you have these incredibly thick, strong walls. But it wasn't just that. The city itself is surrounded by these deep, really steep valleys, which made a direct attack almost impossible. And let's say, just for a second, you somehow managed to get past all of that. Well, congratulations, you've now got to deal with the temple complex, which was basically a second, even stronger fortress inside the first one. And this is exactly what Josephus is getting at here. He's pointing out the sheer strategic brilliance of the layout. Taking the outer city, that was just round one. It meant the Romans would have to start an entirely new siege, a second, probably much tougher battle, just to take the inner sanctuary.
So you can just imagine Pompey and his engineers scratching their heads, trying to figure out how on earth to crack this nut. But while they were doing that, Jerusalem's real weakness started to show, and it had nothing to do with a crumbling wall or a weak gate. Nope, the real vulnerability was a deep crack in the unity of its own people. What Josephus calls a great sedition basically exploded inside the city, a civil war. And this is so important to understand. The biggest fight happening in Jerusalem had nothing to do with the Romans waiting outside. It was all about this nasty internal power struggle between two brothers fighting for the throne. And that feud, well, it was about to give Pompey the exact key he needed to walk right in.
So let's break down these two sides. First, you have the guys loyal to King Aristobulus. Think of them as the hardliners, the fighters. They were all in, ready to defend the city to the last man against Rome. But then you have the other camp, following his brother, Hyrcanus, and they were looking at the Roman war machine, and frankly, they were terrified. They thought fighting was suicide, and the only smart move was to just open the gates. So the city was literally split right down the middle, paralyzed by this family drama.
Something had to give. This internal battle for the city's future couldn't go on forever. And when it finally came to a head, the result was fast and just heartbreaking.
The talking stopped and the fighting started. Not against the Romans, but against each other, right there in the streets of Jerusalem. And in that awful, bloody mess, the war party, Aristobulus' side, they just got overpowered. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and forced to retreat, fighting their own people, their own neighbors, street by street. Pushed into a corner, they fell back to the last defensible spot they had, the temple itself. And then they did something drastic. They destroyed the bridge connecting the temple to the rest of the city. I mean, think about that. It wasn't just a military tactic. It was a huge symbolic statement. They were cutting themselves off completely, turning the most holy place in their world into a lonely, isolated fortress. So now you have the war party barricaded inside the temple. And what does the other side do? Hyrcanus' party, they do the unthinkable. They walk over to the main gates of Jerusalem and just open them. The mighty Roman legions didn't have to break down a single wall. They just marched right in, like invited guests, welcomed by half the people they were there to conquer. And just like that, the main city of Jerusalem was taken, without a single Roman soldier dying in the process. I mean, what a victory for Pompey, right? But the job wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The toughest part was actually still to come.
Pompey was a pro. He didn't waste a second. He sent his officer, Piso, in with a whole army to lock down the palace and set up guards all over the city. Basically, he made the city his. And with that main area now under his thumb, he could focus all of his attention on that last, stubborn group of defenders holed up in the temple.
He tried to talk to the guys in the temple, but they weren't having it. They were dug in, ready to fight to the death. So Pompey started getting ready for a massive siege on the temple itself. And this, right here, is where the story gets really, really painful. because Pompey wasn't planning this attack by himself. He had local advisors.
Josephus's words here are just chilling. He says Hyrcanus's party was very ready to help. Just let that sink in for a moment. They were actively giving counsel and assistance, advice, to a foreign army that was about to attack their own countrymen inside their most holy site. This is the absolute core of the tragedy. The division had become so toxic, so hateful, that one side was willing to help an invader attack their own sacred temple just to get a win over their political rival.
So when you boil it all down, Jerusalem wasn't really conquered by Pompey. It was handed to him on a silver platter. All those incredible walls, those deep valleys, they didn't matter one bit when the real war was happening inside the city, brother against brother. The siege of the temple that came next was, of course, going to be horrific, but it was a disaster that was started by the city's own people. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What's more important to defend, the walls of a city or the bonds that hold a community together?